Chapter 4 of the Children of the New Forest. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Children of the New Forest by Frederick Marryat. Chapter 4. The old forester lay awake the whole of this night, reflecting how he should act relative to the children. He felt the great responsibility that he had incurred, and was alarmed when he considered what might be the consequences if his days were shortened. What would become of them, living in so sequestered a spot that few even knew of its existence, totally shut out from the world, and left to their own resources? He had no fear, if his life was spared, that they would do well, but if he should be called away before they had grown up and were able to help themselves, they might perish. Edward was not 14 years old. It was true that he was an active, brave boy, and thoughtful for his years, but he had not yet strength or skill sufficient for what would be required. Humphrey, the second, also promised well, but still they were all children. I must bring them up to be useful, to depend upon themselves. There is not a moment to be lost, and not a moment shall be lost. I will do my best, and trust to God. I ask but 2 or 3 years, and by that time I trust that they will be able to do without me. They must commence tomorrow the life of foresters' children. Acting upon this resolution, Jacob, as soon as the children were dressed and in the sitting room, opened his Bible, which he had put on the table, and said, "My dear children, you know that you must remain in this cottage, that the wicked troopers may not find you out. They killed your father, and if I had not taken you away, they would have burned you in your beds. You must therefore live here as my children, and you must call yourselves by the name of Armitage, and not that of Beverley. And you must dress like children of the forest, as you do now, and you must do as children of the forest do, that is, you must do everything for yourselves, for you can have no servants to wait upon you. We must all work, but you will like work, if you all work together, for then the work will be nothing but play. Now Edward is the oldest, and he must go out with me in the forest, and I must teach him to kill deer and other game for our support. And when he knows how, then Humphrey shall come out and learn how to shoot." "Yes," said Humphrey, "I'll soon learn." "But not yet, Humphrey, for you must do some work in the meantime. You must look after the pony and the pigs, and you must learn to dig in the garden with Edward and me when we do not go out to hunt. And sometimes I shall go by myself, and leave Edward to work with you when there is work to be done. Alice, dear, you must, with Humphrey, light the fire and clean the house in the morning. Humphrey will go to the spring for water, and do all the hard work. And you must learn to wash, my dear Alice. I'll show you how. And you must learn to get dinner ready with Humphrey, who will assist you, and to make the beds. And little Edith shall take care of the fowls, and feed them every morning, and look for the eggs. Will you, Edith?" "Yes," replied Edith, "and feed all the little chickens when they are hatched, as I did at Arnwood." "Yes, dear, and you'll be very useful. Now, you know that you cannot do all this at once. You'll have to try and try again, but very soon you will, and then it will be all play. I must teach you all, and every day you will do it better, till you want no teaching at all. And now, my dear children, as there is no chaplain here, we must read the Bible every morning. Edward can read, I know. Can you, Humphrey?" "Yes, all except the big words." "Well, you will learn them by and by, and Edward and I will teach Alice and Edith to read in the evenings, when we have nothing to do. It will be an amusement. Now tell me, do you all like what I have told you?" "Yes," they all replied. And then Jacob Armitage read a chapter in the Bible, after which they all knelt down and said the Lord's Prayer. As this was done every morning and every evening, I need not repeat it again. Jacob then showed them again how to clean the house, and Humphrey and Alice soon finished their work under his directions, and then they all sat down to breakfast, which was a very plain one, being generally cold meat and cakes baked on the embers, at which Alice was soon very expert. And little Edith was very useful in watching them for her, while she busied herself about her other work. But the venison was nearly all gone, and after breakfast Jacob and Edward, with the dog Smoker, went out into the woods. Edward had no gun, as he only went out to be taught how to approach the game, which required great caution. Indeed, Jacob had no second gun to give him, if he had wished so to do. "Now, Edward, we are going after a fine stag, if we can find him, which I doubt not. But the difficulty is to get within shot of him. Recollect that you must always be hid, for his sight is very quick. Never be heard, for his ear is sharp, and never come down to him with the wind, for his scent is very fine. Then you must hunt according to the hour of the day. At this time he is feeding. 2 hours hence he will be lying down in the high fern. The dog is no use unless the stag is badly wounded, when the dog will take him. Smoker knows his duty well, and will hide himself as close as we do. We are now going into the thick wood ahead of us, as there are many little spots of cleared ground in it where we may find the deer. But we must keep more to the left, for the wind is to the eastward, and we must walk up against it. And now that we are coming into the wood, recollect, not a word must be said, and you must walk as quietly as possible, keeping behind me. Smoker, to heel!" They proceeded through the wood for more than a mile, when Jacob made a sign to Edward, and dropped down into the fern, crawling along to an open spot, where, at some distance, were a stag and 3 deer grazing. The deer grazed quietly, but the stag was ever and anon raising up his head and snuffing the air as he looked around, evidently acting as a sentinel for the females. The stag was perhaps a long quarter of a mile from where they had crouched down in the fern. Jacob remained immovable till the animal began to feed again, and then he advanced, crawling through the fern, followed by Edward and the dog, who dragged himself on his stomach after Edward. This tedious approach was continued for some time, and they had neared the stag to within half the original distance, when the animal again lifted up his head and appeared uneasy. Jacob stopped and remained without motion. After a time the stag walked away, followed by the does, to the opposite side of the clear spot on which they had been feeding, and, to Edward's annoyance, the animal was half a mile from them. Jacob turned round and crawled into the wood, and when he knew that they were concealed he rose on his feet and said, "You see, Edward, that it requires patience to stalk a deer. What a princely fellow! But he has probably been alarmed this morning, and is very uneasy. Now we must go through the woods till we come to the lee of him on the other side of the dell. You see he has led the does close to the thicket, and we shall have a better chance when we get there, if we are only quiet and cautious." "What startled him, do you think?" said Edward. "I think, when you were crawling through the fern after me, you broke a piece of rotten stick that was under you. Did you not?" "Yes, but that made but little noise." "Quite enough to startle a red deer, Edward, as you will find out before you have been long a forester. These checks will happen, and have happened to me 100 times, and then all the work is to be done over again. Now then, to make the circuit. We had better not say a word. If we get safe now to the other side, we are sure of him." They proceeded at a quick walk through the forest, and in half an hour had gained the side where the deer were feeding. When about 300 yards from the game, Jacob again sunk down on his hands and knees, crawling from bush to bush, stopping whenever the stag raised his head, and advancing again when it resumed feeding. At last they came to the fern at the side of the wood, and crawled through it as before, but still more cautiously as they approached the stag. In this manner they arrived at last to within 80 yards of the animal, and then Jacob advanced his gun ready to put it to his shoulder, and, as he cocked the lock, raised himself to fire. The click occasioned by the cocking of the lock roused up the stag instantly, and he turned his head in the direction from whence the noise had proceeded. As he did so, Jacob fired, aiming behind the animal's shoulder. The stag made a bound, came down again, dropped on his knees, attempted to run, and fell dead, while the does fled away with the rapidity of the wind. Edward started up on his legs with a shout of exultation. Jacob commenced reloading his gun, and stopped Edward as he was about to run up to where the animal lay. "Edward, you must learn your craft," said Jacob. "Never do that again. Never shout in that way. On the contrary, you should have remained still in the fern." "Why so? The stag is dead." "Yes, my dear boy, that stag is dead. But how do you know but what there may be another lying down in the fern close to us, or at some distance from us, which you have alarmed by your shout? Suppose that we both had guns, and that the report of mine had started another stag lying in the fern within shot. You would have been able to shoot it. Or if a stag was lying at a distance, the report of the gun might have started him so as to induce him to move his head without raising. I should have seen his antlers and move and marked his lair, and we should then have gone after him and stalked him too." "I see," replied Edward. "I was wrong. But I shall know better another time." "That's why I tell you, my boy," replied Jacob. "Now let us go to our quarry. Ay, Edward, this is a noble beast. I thought that he was a hart royal, and so he is." "What is a hart royal, Jacob?" "Why, a stag is called a brocket until he is 3 years old. At 4 years he is a staggart. At 5 years a warrantable stag, and after 5 years he becomes a hart royal.